Today's devotion is called God Covers Our Losses. And we are on January 28th, the 28th day in this journey. And our morning rinse is in 2 Chronicles 25 through 27. You're hearing a lot of history here about the kings of Israel, and Amaziah had a heart towards God, but not a whole heart. So he ended up falling to destruction, even though there were times in his life where he did make good decisions. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So go ahead and read 2 Chronicles 25 through 27. Okay, the featured verses are 2 Chronicles 25, verses 9 through 10. Amaziah said to the man of God, "But what shall we do for the 100 talents which I have given to the troops of Israel?" And the man of God answered, "The Lord has much more to give you than this." Then Amaziah dismissed them, the troops which came to him from Ephraim, to go home. So their anger burned against Judah, and they returned home in fierce anger. So one of the instructions that God had was he did not want certain alliances in this portion of the history. And he didn't want any alliances with the northern kingdom. And they were not following after him. And so Amaziah actually disobeyed in that moment. And he was headed off to war because this kingdom had killed his dad. And so he was going off to war against them. And he formed an alliance with the northern kingdom and hired 100,000 warriors for 100 talents. So talents are one of several forms of measurement in the Bible. And during this time, 1 talent was equal to about 3,000 shekels. So 1 talent equals 3,000 shekels. Not only does the weight of a shekel vary from 6 to 10 grams, according to the research that I did, but the Bible mentions at least 3 different kinds of shekels. So they weigh differently, there's different shekels, and so it's almost impossible to get an exact dollar figure that was paid out to these soldiers. However, using a baseline figure of conversion, so 1 shekel was worth at least $320. So that is making 3,000 shekels worth about $960,000. So if we multiply this figure by 100, of the talents, the base salary that was paid to this army was roughly about $96 million. In reality, with 100,000 soldiers, it might not necessarily be a big salary, but one of the things that the armies would do is, even though they got paid, their biggest form of increase would be the plundering side. So they wanted sometimes to go to war because they would get to plunder and come back with all kinds of new things and gold and whatever else that they got to plunder. They'd take it all. Since Amaziah was hiring a military force, if he had consulted God about forming this alliance before he made this arrangement, he obviously would have bypassed a bad decision and the burden of such a financial loss to this nation. However, a man of God came to Amaziah, and it does not say who it was, and they advised him to send the army home and to break that alliance. So fortunately, Amaziah listened in that moment. He should not have been in that alliance anyway. But God redeems us even when we make mistakes, and he honors us when we obey, especially when we break alliances that we should never have had. Just like Amaziah, sometimes our poor decisions can cost us something, including money. And even though he may have been confident about winning that war, it was not worth it. And here is where it gets fun, in my opinion. Despite that large sum of money that was given out, but the man of God told him not to worry, and he said, "The Lord has much more to give you than this." And God has limitless funds to cover our losses when we turn from making poor choices. there are times where God wants us to break alliances with someone. Maybe that's a friend that we know is not a godly friend. I mean, maybe that's somebody who is a colleague at your job that, I don't know, maybe you've been seeking their professional advice, and some of their professional opinions don't necessarily align up with the integrity of what God would want you to do in certain situations. But my challenge for you today and to dig deeper is this: are there any relationships that you need to break ties with? The freedom that you feel in obedience is worth the sacrifice of any loss. And just like Amaziah had to break alliances with this military group, even though they could have helped him potentially win the war that he was at, sometimes it's better to cut our losses and make our spirit man stronger. And so it's important to dig deep into us and see if there's any relationships that we have that we should not have. This is a hard one. This is a hard, and it can be a very difficult thing to do. And I know in my life, I have had instances where I've had friendships that were not encouraging me in godly ways, and they were not helping me grow spiritually. And so I wouldn't say that that's necessarily an alliance like what Amaziah was dealing with, but it was enough of a tie with that friend that I eventually had to break it off or, go my separate ways. And I'm sure we all have had that happen in our lives. And so, is there anyone in your life that you are supposed to tone down that relationship, I guess is the best way to say it? Not that you don't love that person, but maybe utilizing their voice in such a strong way maybe needs to come to an end because they are not encouraging you spiritually. I know that it can be difficult, but that would be my challenge for you today is if there's anybody in your life that God is speaking to you about, ask him to help you in ways to break that tie without the lack of love. And when you sit down tonight with your journal, write down the relationships that you are taking or the steps that you are taking towards breaking those ties. Write down how you feel after you've made this decision. Write down who it is that you feel God is speaking to you about. And if it's not you that he's talking to, then maybe you are supposed to help someone else through this. Maybe you know somebody who is in an abusive situation. So it may not necessarily be you, but you may know someone who is struggling in some kind of abusive relationship or some kind of relationship that needs addressing. And this is tough because we don't know all of the ins and outs of what's on the other side. But yet God can speak to you and he can speak to the other person through you. And so anyway, I hope that those relationships that you know that are not godly, that you know that you are not supposed to be so strong at, would be something that you would consider and that God would help you through the journey of those relationships, whether they're colleagues or business relationships, or even those friendships that you know are not a great relationship to have. And so let's grow together and continue to build our faith as we form friendships around us that are going to help us move towards Christ and growing deeper. And I hope that you were encouraged and you grew today in this podcast. And if you do not have your printed copy of Rinse, Reflect, Repeat, then the show notes have the link. Here's a picture of it. You can click on that, or you can go to anitacordell.com. And as always, keep rinsing, reflecting, and repeating. God bless you.